All right, nerds. I have Steve Marchand back in the show. He was last on before the midterms, which is only a few weeks ago. It feels like it was ages ago. And we were talking about, well, history has shown that, the party in the White House is gonna really get a bit of a shellacking, and well, obviously both of us, I think, were pleasantly surprised, and then now. Uh, we're going to talk also about 2024 and how we pick our nominees. And that was something we touched on as well last time. And some new information has come out with President Biden's proposal. So, hello, nerds, and welcome to the show, Steve.
Oh, hello, nerds. Always a pleasure.
So, you are in the great state of New Hampshire, first in the nation. And it sounds like things are getting shook up, at least for Iowa. Is New Hampshire kind of safe to be picking our president so early in the process? What's your take on what's going on?
Well, a lot is going on, and it's always a pleasure, Tom, to spend time with you and your audience. And it's great. Always get great questions and feedback. And the timing of getting together is pretty interesting because just late yesterday, the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, uh,
Mm-hmm.
went a long way towards codifying within their ranks what the order of the early primaries will be in 2024. And yeah, shakeup is definitely the right term. Iowa is absolutely the most shaken up by this. They have been, at least for now, completely tossed out of the early state window entirely.
Mm.
And frankly, if viewers may recall, they had a very difficult time determining who the winner was
Yeah.
in 2020. I think it was Buttigieg and Sanders were in a virtual tie, both
Yeah.
claiming they won as they got off the tarmac, walked onto the tarmac in New Hampshire in the wee hours the next morning. And it really did, it caused a lot of problems, along with the whole caucus system. New Hampshire, glad to say, ran as we always do.
Yeah.
And by the way, bias alert, born and bred, folks watching know New Hampshire right here. But we run campaigns extremely well, and we know how to do them. We get you the results that night. We have some of the nation's highest participation rates, midterm, regular election, primary, presidential primary. We have no issues relating to discrepancies,
Mm-hmm.
fraud, these sort of things. We run a really good election, and we've done it no matter who has been in charge in the corner office or who the Secretary of State has been over the course of my lifetime and before. And we've been doing this for 100 years. So we know how to run an election really well in a way that gives everybody at least a chance if they put the time in a retail way in New Hampshire. And we did that again in 2020. I would note that now President Biden finished fifth in New Hampshire after finishing fourth in Iowa, which may or may not be relevant to the decision making process of yesterday. Um, what have you done for me lately? um, and he skipped Nevada basically to go to South Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
which was his do or die state.
Yeah.
And of course, he crushed it there. And most of the rest of the field, including Buttigieg and Klobuchar and O'Rourke and others, closed in. Those that were still in the race by then all lined up behind Biden the day that weekend before their primary, and it was a devastating blow to Sanders and Warren and the rest of the field. So the
Mm-hmm.
new proposed calendar would be Saturday, February 3rd, South Carolina, Tuesday, February 6th, Nevada and New Hampshire at the same time. And then right after that, a week later, would be uh, Michigan. And then a week after that would be Georgia. And then a week or two after that would be Super Tuesday. And frankly, by then you probably would know who the nominee is in most circumstances. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
this is not going to happen. And it's not. And I'm not being a jerk. I would urge everybody to read the Boston Globe's ace political reporter and journalist, James Pindell. He knows as much about this as anybody in America. He wrote, and I believe it was published yesterday, you can find it online, in the Boston Globe the definitive piece so far about why this just isn't going to happen that way. A few reasons. Number one, from a New Hampshire perspective, it won't happen because we have a state law that is as old as I am that says that the Secretary of State and only the Secretary of State not only has the authority to place the date of the New Hampshire primary, they have a legal obligation. They must place it 7 days or more before, quote, any similar event.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that last show.
Yeah. So, and then now the way the New Hampshire primary would be diminished in its century-long importance will not be because we literally don't go first, because we're gonna. Like, Secretary of State would be breaking the law if we don't go first. We'll do it the week of Christmas of 2023 if we have to. Like, that's just the way it is. The real question is, will candidates show up for it?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of folks in the national media are having the wrong debate about this. They're like, oh my God, will New Hampshire go first? There's no debate. Yes. It's just, will candidates show up, and will the media follow it? And will it be treated as the important event that it largely has been for, more than my lifetime? And of course, I can't answer that question. No, that's the question I can't answer with the same confidence.
Yeah.
That I can answer with, will it be first? Yes, it will. Also, one last thing on this first point about New Hampshire, then we'll dive into other things. In order for New Hampshire and the other three states to be in the early window that we've just described, the free Super Tuesday window, the other four states, Georgia, South Carolina, Nevada, New Hampshire, and Michigan, by January 5th, like a month from now, each state must have a signed document that agrees to a number of things, ranging from the dates I just laid out to a commitment to early voting, no excuse absentee voting if they don't already have it, plus a number of other financial and logistical commitments that must be signed by the Speaker of their state legislature, the President of their state Senate, and the Governor of their state. I have breaking news for the people of America. Republican Governor Chris Sununu, Republican State Senate President Jeb Bradley, and Republican Speaker of the House Jason Osborne will not be signing this document to the Democratic National Committee doing any of this on, before, or after January 5th, 2023. It's just not going to happen. And by the way, it won't happen in South Carolina with the Republican House, Republican State Senate, Republican Governor. It won't happen in Nevada with the Republican Governor. It won't happen in Georgia with Brian Kemp, a Republican Senator, and a Republican House. Four of the five states do not have Democratic control of this process. And there's no way all these Republicans are going to offer to help out the DNC. And by the way, move cost their states money, because the Republicans have already locked in their field. They're going to go Iowa first, New Hampshire second, Nevada, South Carolina. They've already locked it in. So they're not going to move their own process for the Democratic Party. They're not going to do that. So this is kind of I don't know whether everybody knew it when they voted for this or whether they don't care, but it's just not going to happen the way that they've described.
So let's go back to the New Hampshire point. If we stipulate that New Hampshire is going to hold their primary first, irrespective of almost what the DNC says, just because, that's the way that New Hampshire has put it into law for how the state is run. If I were in the DNC, I would consider this sort of like, hey, that's not for you to decide. Like, we're a national party. And, what if South Carolina says, well, we're going to enact a law saying we're a week before New Hampshire? Like, at some point, it's a national party. They have to decide the order and composition that they think makes most sense for the party. And if New Hampshire does put its shingle out on December 2023, that's fine. we will tell our candidates like we will not count those results because that's in violation of our party policy. You can go there if you want, but it does it's like a preseason game.
Now, that's a great point. A few things. Number one is while the party, through its GNC and so forth, both major parties have the right to set up a calendar like this as they have proposed. They don't actually run any of these elections. So they can propose it and they can
Mm-hmm.
try to sanction it sort of the way you just suggested. And which, by the way, has been done before. Um, but they can't mandate, they can't supersede New Hampshire's law. They can do things about what we do with our law.
Mm-hmm.
So to your point, so that's the first thing. The DNC can propose and the RNC anything it wants, but they cannot supersede the state's individual laws. And other states do have laws that are not quite as ironclad and elegant in their simplicity as New Hampshire's, but several other states have laws that have elements like it as well. And by the way, South Carolina wasn't asking to go first. Jim Clyburn said, and everybody, all the reporting, including Pendle's down there, confirms this. South Carolina wasn't asking for this. The DNC wasn't asking for this. They were asking for some changes, but nobody thought or was asking for South Carolina to go first. Only one person was asking for South Carolina to go first, Joe Biden, and that happens to carry a lot of weight, to be fair. So the first thing is they can say whatever they want, but they can't supersede state law. So let's talk about the potential sanctioning, which
Mm-hmm.
is a very important point. So I was born in 1974. 2 years later, in 1976, Jimmy Carter, whose nickname was Jimmy Who, went from an ex-governor of what was then seen as a small state, Georgia, and basically used Iowa to some extent and primarily New Hampshire to elevate himself and in the process really take the New Hampshire primary to another level because it gave a lot of underdog candidates in both parties an actual template that said it's not just a theory.
Mm-hmm.
You actually can compete with the big dogs if you start in a small state, you do it early, you work your butt off, and obviously if you connect with the voters. One thing is we have same day voter registration, we have undeclareds can pick, which is our version of independents, and which make up a plurality of the state's population. Can select which ballot they want when they walk into the voting booth that day. And so that is proven to be incredibly powerful for whether it's John McCain in 2000 beating George W. Bush or Gary Hart in 1984, or Bernie Sanders in 2016 defeating Hillary Clinton. It actually helped Donald Trump a lot in 2016. There's a lot of evidence of this, and it resembles sort of the way to win the national election is not just you have to do well with your party, but you also have to do well with the folks that are, at least theoretically, in the middle of the electorate. Because let's face it, generally speaking, there is a motivation of the base element to winning elections, and there's a persuasion of the middle element to winning elections. And the ideal training ground for that is one that rewards both skill sets. And this is where the undeclared being like 43% of the state is a huge part of it. So in the past, Delaware tried to go ahead of us. Michigan has tried to go ahead of us. Indiana tried to go ahead of us. Arizona tried to go ahead of us over the past 30 years. And every time we basically did what I just told you we're going to do again. And the DNC a number of times has threatened to have our delegates,
Mm-hmm.
remove our delegates, punish candidates that campaigned in New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, none of that has ever come to fruition because, at least up to now, the benefits of competing and succeeding in the New Hampshire primary were always so overwhelming. The media follow it, the voters turn out for it, and it's very retail. I mean, all these other states, Nevada may not be a big state by population standards, but it's an enormous state by geographic standards
Mm-hmm.
that basically is two geographic places, Greater Las Vegas and Greater Reno. and one cannot hop in the car and go hit those the way that in New Hampshire you can hit the mill towns that have been moving towards Republicans, it like a Manchester, parts of Manchester or Claremont or Laconia, and some of the more liberal enclaves like a Durham or a Portsmouth. But then also, and this is where Biden won the general election, can hit the emerging suburban Democratic vote, which is really key for how Democrats have been able to survive losing the blue collar vote in places like suburban Manchester, suburban Seacoast, suburban Nashua. And so within about a 90-minute drive, one is able to hit some of the nation's best examples of the sort of emerging suburban vote, the blue collar vote, as well as sort of the Democratic, whether it's college town or higher income town, Democratic deep blue vote that is so important in the primaries as well. So, I think a lot of folks are focused so much on racial composition, and that is certainly one important factor. But of course, it would be insulting to any group, whether by race, ethnicity, socioeconomics, education, to sort of lob everybody of that group as monolithically the same politically. That would be at a minimum insulting, and at worst, it would sort of foster some of the worst impulses of our nation's past. And so I look at this as what states are able to have the platform to allow access for people, whether they're Mike Bloomberg money or they're Bernie Sanders at 5% against Hillary in 2015, Gary Hart, Jimmy Carter, John McCain, Donald Trump, whoever you are. Is this a platform that gives you a chance? Are you small and compact? And do you have all the different components of the American electorate in terms of voter behavior, which is what it's all about at the end of the day? And I would argue that nobody has the history and the compactness of that diversity of voting behavior that New Hampshire continues to demonstrate, said the guy from New Hampshire.
All right. Well, one last question about this, and then we have to talk about who we might imagine seeing in any of these primaries for both parties, because that's unclear or worth discussing. But one last thing on the New Hampshire thing. Appreciate the value of not only tradition, but also the performance of New Hampshire in terms of execution of, well-run primaries and the diversity of, suburban and rural and the compactness of the state and how it gives accessibility to candidates that don't have deep pockets right out of the gates. Totally get it. We are talking about you guys just moving a few days after South Carolina. It's not like wouldn't you get all of those benefits with the proposal? I mean, does it matter that you're on Feb 6th and not on Feb 3rd? Like, is that that big of a deal?
So one of the things that I think the DNC is really not getting here is there has been 1980 is when South Carolina entered the mix, right? It was Iowa and New Hampshire, and then in 80 South Carolina jumped in and became the traditional third, and then more recently Nevada came in, and so we've had this mix of Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina. Mm-hmm. What you're hearing a lot of from national level activists and members of the DNC is New Hampshire's problem is a lack of, and they're not quite, sometimes explicit, sometimes not. You guys are too white. They don't say these different DNC members don't get on other factors that also matter, as if all white voters vote the same or something. Mm-hmm. As if Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, who are both white, are somehow like, mm-hmm. or Hillary Clinton and Dennis Kucinich are the same. Or, imagine, replace that with any other ethnicity, geography, racial, composition. And that would be pretty insulting pretty quick. And it's just an overly simplistic, a lot of these folks never been to New Hampshire. I'm like, really? So it's more than, it is an important factor. And to not say that is also to be ignorant about it. but it's a composite of a lot of things. And one of the things that I think has served the Democratic Party generally well, and actually probably the Republican Party, is if you combine New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and Iowa, the composite of those early states
Yep.
did actually, on balance, kind of resemble America better than any one state was going to. And so the idea that making an argument that South Carolina should go first because it better resembles America. Tom, 56% of the Democratic electorate in the South Carolina primary in 2020 was black.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now it was a very low number in New Hampshire, and I think any New Hampshireite who pretends that we are, a perfect match in terms of race for the country, well, that's not true. Like, we have to be honest about that. But I mean, what the irony is, the mix. By the way, only 2% of the electoral turnout in the South Carolina primary in 2020 was Hispanic. 2%. Guess what percent was Asian American? 0%. The fastest growing non-white population in the country is Asian American. South Carolina, 0%. So, by the way, it's not like New Hampshire was 20%. But if you're going to make an argument that the first state should be a pretty, if not mirror-like, at least in the ballpark, resemblance of the national racial composition, you would pick Virginia. You would pick Illinois. You actually would pick the state of New York. These are three of the actually, you might pick Rhode Island. I mean, it's kind of, if you look at the top 10 states that, like, guess what 4 states are not in the top 10? Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada. Like, what are we doing? Let's be honest. So to me, that's an important point. And I think we're using a lot of either code language or, like, just make the argument you want to make. But if we're looking for a better reflection of the country's racial composition, well, then we wouldn't be talking about any of these states in a vacuum. You'd be talking about them as a package. Now, one of the big problems with the exact timing, you need to have space. If we're going to do this right as a party and as a country, this is almost less about whether New Hampshire was first, second, third, fourth, whatever. The space between is a real error in this proposed calendar. There's 3 days. And by the way, I would say the same thing if New Hampshire were first and South Carolina was 3 days later. It's the same problem. Historically, the thing that allows the little woman, the little man candidate to be able to take advantage of working their butt off in a small state, doing well, and then being able to catapult that into success in subsequent states is that you've got to have enough time to take advantage of the juice. You got to have time to go and campaign in the next states. You need to have time to actually literally raise the money. Like, you need time to actually harvest the money that people want to give you that allows you to go on TV in South Carolina or Nevada or Georgia, which is now a very expensive state to campaign in, by the way. You need and then Super Tuesday is like 2 weeks after that. And that's going to probably be 15 to 20 states that will likely include states like Texas and Florida. So, like, you need time to take advantage of the work you've just done and to have one state go first and then 3 days later have 2 more states that are directly across the country from each other. That's not good. And then right after that, you're doing Michigan, which is a big state with a really expensive media market. And then 2 weeks after that, we're going to go to Georgia, which is really big and has an even more expensive media market. All this, what this does, and I don't know that people are thinking of it this way. I am not here to talk about motive. I'm here to talk about what we can see. And what we know is if you only put 3 days between the first one and then the second and third one on the same day, you can't even make the argument that you're giving somebody a chance to build momentum. New Hampshire has, and I think this is another issue that Nevada certainly, and Iowa certainly, and Georgia, frankly, have had. We will tell you who the winner of the primary was that night. And some people are like, what's the big deal? Well, a big part of this is being able to take the decision made by the electorate of that state and being able to use it as a candidate to springboard to the next state, especially for the one that's not the big money person, not the big name person. And if we don't know who the winner is for 1, 2, 3, 4 days, that's fine if you're picking the president in the general election, because you can wait 4 days. Like if it takes 3, 4 extra days to find out if Fetterman or Oz won, it's not a big deal because there's no more elections after that. That is the election. But if we're taking all this time, well, in less than a week, it's the next election. So like you don't even know who won.
Yeah.
And now, it takes away the whole argument that this gives anybody a chance. And frankly, what it does do is it gives very few kinds of candidates any real chance. And I would argue, again, New Hampshire, by giving a week before the next event, and it has proven, allows candidates to either recover from a really bad performance if they can put it together, or to enjoy the benefit of a great performance. And that's what it's all about. It's about giving everybody a chance, put it on the playing field, see what you can do. And then, you got to live with those results, but you got to give folks a chance on the playing field. I don't think that's what the DNC is prioritizing at all in this.
Let's talk about who we expect to see in these primaries. Is this an academic debate for 2024 because surely we're just going to see Biden v. Trump? Or do we think the Democratic primary will have a little bit of dynamism to it? Or is it more of a kind of rubber stamping of the sitting president?
Well, I mean, the Democratic side, unless Joe Biden decides not to run again, and it sure seems like he's going to run again, and I think we're going to know that sooner than later. This isn't going to be like next summer or something. He seems awfully interested in this 2024 calendar, right? There's only two reasons he cares this much about it. Either A, he's running again, and I'm running again, so let's do this thing. Or and I think that's what it is. Or he's not running again, and he's teeing it up to maximize success for certain profiles of candidates. One would think that if the president isn't running again, they would be rooting for their vice president. This would be unusual if that was not the case. I will say Joe Biden was Barack Obama's vice president, and he did not come out and endorse Joe Biden early in his process. So you never know. But in this case, I don't think that's what's going on. I do think Biden's going to run again. He will not receive a serious primary. And so everything we've just talked about is an academic exercise on the Democratic side in 2024, but very meaningful for planning the seats for 2028 when there will, by definition, be a new nominee on the Democratic side, no matter what Biden wins or loses. On the Republican side, I must say, I don't agree with Governor Chris Sununu, who I've run for governor in this state. I've known Chris for a long time. I think Democrats in the state have underestimated Governor Sununu's political acumen. He's just won a fourth term comfortably. He is good at this stuff. So I give him the respect. He said before the November election, he was asked on like CNN, do you think that if Donald Trump runs again, that he pretty much gets the clean runway as the former president? And he didn't even hesitate. He laughs. He goes 0%. No matter what, whether Trump runs again or not, there will be, I think he said, at least 6 to 10 Republicans who will also run to try to be the nominee. Then they asked if he'd be one of them, and he shucks that stuff. I don't think he's going to run this time. But and it turns out he's correct. I didn't know that he was quite confident of that. I was somewhat skeptical of that. It turns out he's correct. There is plenty of evidence. There are Republicans already starting to come up here the RNC has already approved the Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, quad early state,
Mm-hmm.
which, by the
Mm-hmm.
way, is a whole nother thing. Like, so how's that going to line up with the Democrats' proposed calendar? They are. So the Republicans are all lined up. And it is clear that even people that said they would not run against Donald Trump if he ran again, people like Mike Pompeo, people like Nikki Haley,
Mm-hmm.
people like Mike Pence, are pretty clearly have no problem running against him now. And I think we're going to start seeing that pretty soon. And we're already seeing the activity here in New Hampshire. It is going to be a very exciting Republican primary with a very uncertain outcome.
What do you think is going to happen with the Harvard Yale guy from Florida,
Um,
the man of the people?
the man of the people, right? The everyman Harvard Yale guy, everyman. Yeah, yeah. Look, I know my parents, who are immigrants
Mm-hmm.
and loved Bill Clinton before they were naturalized, so they couldn't vote for him, but they loved him. And they follow politics more because of my adult lifetime, my activity. They follow stuff a lot more closely. And they really did love Andrew. They loved Andrew Yang. And in 2016, they really liked Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
And then Bernie lost the prize, obviously was not the nominee. And then they voted for Trump.
Mm.
And then in 2020, they would have voted for Andrew in the general. And by the way, that predates my engagement, my friendship and relationship. They met him very early, and they liked him a lot. They liked his outsiderness, which is obvious. If you like Bernie, then it's pretty clear. And that's a very New Hampshire thing. There's a lot of that. When Andrew was not the nominee, they voted for Trump again.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked them a few months ago,
what
are you doing this time? What do you think? And they're like, my mom didn't even hesitate. I like DeSantis. He's my guy. Now, I know Tucker Carlson likes DeSantis, and I do think that is the filter through which a lot of folks are, like my folks, are viewing this.
Yeah.
My parents have not met any of the potential candidates. They have not locked in. DeSantis is clearly getting the platform beyond anybody not named Trump in the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
And he could totally rock it out. One could easily see how that works out pretty well for him, at least to the nomination. However, here are some words nobody that knows him in Florida has ever used: charming, electric, charismatic. I mean, he has not. The road to the nomination in both parties is lined with people that totally had this thing. Mm-hmm. And then when you actually kick the tires on them, it turns out they lack some of the, Jeb Bush was totally going to win.
Yeah. Or Beto O'Rourke, I felt like he was great on paper.
Great on paper.
But then, yeah.
And now some of the ones that are great on paper, like Barack Obama, great on paper, right?
Yeah.
It ends up working out. Ronald Reagan, it ends up working out. But Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama, we can talk about them the way I just did, not because they were the rule, but because they were, from a political talent perspective, truly exceptions. I mean, amazing political talent, generational talent. Does Ron DeSantis have generational political talent? I don't think so. But I'll tell you this, if you're betting money, right now you're betting on either Trump to get the nomination again or DeSantis. And then after that, you would say the field would be the third, right? I mean, that DeSantis is clearly starts this process in about as good a position as anybody not named Trump could start this process.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I've placed some personal bets with friends, and I've bet that Trump would get the nomination. And I'm giving my friends anyone but Trump as their option.
Okay.
And I guess my biggest concern on that bet is, well, Ron DeSantis. My mom is also a big Tucker Carlson viewer, and she gave me the same answer. Like, I like DeSantis. I was like, whoa, that's interesting. Even though Trump had announced his, reelection, she wasn't.
Yeah, and by the way, Tom,
yeah.
I don't know if this is the same in your experience. I was. This is a big deal in my years as a political operative, as a candidate, as a
Mm-hmm.
mayor. One thing that is gold, and it's so hard to get in the world of politics, is when you ask a non hyperactivist voter, right?
Yeah.
Like take out that 5% of people that follow this stuff all the time as
Mm-hmm.
sport. Go to people like my folks who are gonna vote. My mom is 70, my dad is 77. They're retired. My mom has a GED. My dad didn't go to high school. Salt of the earth, awesome people, work their ass off. Immigrant, I just bias alert. They're awesome. I love my parents. And there's so many folks like that in New Hampshire. So many immigrant families like that. A
Mm-hmm.
lot from Quebec, and they're awesome. And but one thing about that cohort is if you ask them an open-ended question about who they like, versus if you give them a list, you'd be viewers may be surprised at how infrequently that voter will be able to name somebody out of the air. There in politics, when you can go from, if I give you a list of people, there's like, and
Mm-hmm.
as a candidate, I've been there. There's three levels. The first level is if I give you a list of people and I put this name on, will you even know who the F that person is?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I'm going to call that person Tom Cotton. Like, my parents don't know who Tom Cotton is.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know. Mike Pompeo, who the F is Mike Pompeo? I mean, I'm not dissing these people, I mean, it's hard to, that's so hard to get out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then there's a second place. If you can break through one and get to stage two is if I give you a list of people and I name a candidate,
Mm-hmm.
could you be like, yeah, I know that name, and I actually have an opinion of some kind about that name. We're going to call that person. I'm thinking about who in the field that would be, because I would argue that DeSantis is at the top level now, which
Right.
is amazing.
Yeah.
DeSantis has moved on. It's interesting. I would actually say it doesn't mean they're going to be successful. I think Lindsey Graham might actually be at
Yeah.
that level.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he's just so in the news all the time. There aren't a lot. It's very hard to get into that next tier.
Maybe
But then
Brian Kemp. Would they
it's
recognize his name?
possible. It's
Yeah.
possible.
Mm-hmm.
Kemp got so much, news on the Democratic side. I could say, like for example, I think Amy Klobuchar and Pete,
Mm-hmm.
Buttigieg is somewhere between the second tier and the
And the
final
first. Yeah.
tier.
Mm-hmm.
Klobuchar is not at that third tier yet, but she's
Mm-hmm.
almost certainly in the second tier, which is pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth Warren is probably in the third tier, but she, for whatever number of reasons, seems to carry higher negatives within that.
Mm-hmm.
My parents aren't angry at Amy Klobuchar. If you said her name, they would recognize it. If I said, name some Democrats you can't stand, they would. There's a good chance they would name Elizabeth Warren. And it's funny because they would also say they like Bernie Sanders. It's a weird thing.
Yeah.
Bernie, anyway, there's a lot of factors. Like, let's face it, there could be some sexism in there. If we're being honest, a gender typing. Some of it is they probably saw Bernie at something and they liked it, and that's very hard to shake once you make that in-person impression. DeSantis has made it to the third tier. If I say, who do you like? My mom will say, Ron DeSantis.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is so hard to get to.
So here's my argument for why I still will win my bets that Trump will be the nominee. My argument would be, yes, DeSantis is the most dangerous contender, but he's a rational man, and he'll say, look, I'm pretty popular, and if I throw my hat in the ring now, I'm going to be like getting into a cage with a wild animal, a rabid orange animal, right? And even if I win the nomination, I'm going to be bloodied. And if I don't win the nomination, I'm screwed. Why don't I just let Trump run and lose, and then I'm the guy for 28?
There are models like that. I will say, generally speaking, the people that run for president and make it to the highest levels, either win the whole thing or become the nominee and go down fighting. It's very rare that I could give you an example of somebody in the modern era, let's say the last 40 to 50 years, who did it by sort of timing it perfectly the way
Mm-hmm.
you're sort of suggesting. I can give you many examples of folks that were like, screw it. Like if
Obama.
smoke them if you got them. So, and
Yeah.
by the way, so Obama,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, on paper, Obama had so many awesome things going for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are a lot of people saying, wait your turn, buddy. And he's
Okay.
like,
All right. So that fair enough. That's true. And I think in Obama's case, he was such an athlete that
yes,
he can skip. But as we discussed, like Ron is a little bit like Harris. Like on paper, it looks good, but I think when you actually watch him talk and engage with people, he just doesn't. He doesn't energize the room the way a Trump or Obama does. Secondly, even if Trump is weakened, his base is going to show up in the primaries. And they are the ones that are going to influence the primaries more than the general election polls. So I'm not saying for sure Ron won't run, but there's a lot of reasons why he should be really careful because you're going up against one of the best kind of bare knuckle fighters in politics with a huge, very loyal and pissed off base that are still, following Trump's, lead, and there's like nothing he can do, it seems, to lose their support. Even, all the stuff he's done with the documents and all of
legal
his, not,
problems.
yeah,
Like, I mean, the Donald Trump, the best thing that Donald could happen for Donald Trump is to have a bunch of candidates think, yeah. I won't make the mistake that everybody made in 2015 when everybody was like, don't worry. Eventually, Trump will tucker out. Eventually, the other candidates will figure it out. And next thing you know, it's too late. And so with 30% of the vote, Donald Trump, he has a higher base, to your point, that is
mm-hmm.
more loyal than any other candidate. And man, it's up to this point, it seems like a pretty darn durable, loyal base he has. Is it 51%? Doesn't have to be. If it's 30%, that might be enough. Now, in a number of states, and I believe Republican primary rules are more of this than Democratic rules. Democratic rules are almost entirely proportional. So as long as you meet a certain threshold
Mm-hmm.
of the vote, percent of the vote, you get some delegates.
Right.
Which makes it very hard to pull away. Remember in 2008 when Obama
Yeah.
got an early lead on Hillary Clinton,
Mm-hmm.
she even when she was winning these primaries 60 to 40,
Yeah.
she
Big
wasn't
states.
gaining a
Mm-hmm.
lot.
Yeah.
In the Republican, the majority of their primaries are winner take all.
Yeah.
And this is what made it impossible. And so the Republicans that are not Trump, it's so hard. They're going to have to do what the Democrats did in 2020, which is you're going to have to take Klobuchar. I just talked to Klobuchar's state director from New Hampshire yesterday. I had coffee with him. And I was, he was telling me about that moment because he was working for Klobuchar after New Hampshire. She did very well here. And
Mm-hmm.
and there was that moment. They're like, boy, she is really kicking butt. But they could read the tea leaves. And
Yeah.
Beto, Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, they all sort of showed some humility and playing the long game.
Mm-hmm.
And they all got out and they did it in a way that allowed this thing to consolidate. They didn't want Bernie to be the nominee and they locked it down. There's no evidence that Republicans are good at this. And so I do think that's the best argument for Trump is, hey, am I going to get 51%? Nope. And
No.
guess what, brother? I don't need to.
Yeah. If it's another free for all and a bunch of second tier Republicans run against him, that's just perfect for him. It'll be like what he did last time.
And this is where DeSantis, his strategy almost certainly will have to be one where he has to be able to do what Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and John Kasich in their own lanes thought they could do, but ultimately could not, which is turn it into a head-to-head.
Yes.
Early enough that then I think he can win a head-to-head.
Yes. Yeah.
But if he doesn't get there pretty quickly, then Trump gets a lead, and then DeSantis ends up being the Hillary of '08,
Yeah.
unable to kind of catch up
Yeah.
because it's just too far ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if Ron's team reaches out to all the second tier Republicans and says, look, you guys are all going to get your ass kicked by Trump, but if you hang back, I'm going to go in and you endorse me, like, I'll remember this when we make appointments.
I mean, DeSantis, if he's the nominee, will need a vice president, like they all,
Yeah.
all these candidates do. And I think that it is not clear at all who DeSantis would pick. There's no obvious cohort. I mean, with Biden, he said, he made it very clear that he was going to choose a woman of color as his VP, and of course, in part because of historic inequities in the country, that there are obviously remaining effects of that. It's not like there's a pool. There was a limited number of people because he had defined it in a pretty specific way. And so it's not like, Pete Buttigieg was like, well, I'm not going to be the VP. He knew that, right? Amy Klobuchar pretty much knew she wasn't going to be it. DeSantis has not, and I'm confident will not, make any such declaration,
Right.
which will theoretically provide sort of cheese for the,
Yes.
hey, this could be.
Yeah. Steve, I know I promised you we'd let you out at the top of the hour, and the time flew by. Before we go, I do have one question from a channel member, Jeremy. Do you think Tulsi Gabbard has a chance if she runs?
No.
There's a lot of Tulsi and Yang Gang overlap, interestingly enough. Maybe kind of outsider thing. What do you think her future
an
is?
outsider thing. No, there's a bunch of reasons that might contribute to it, but I don't think Tulsi Gabbard. The only thing I could imagine is a Republican wins the White House, and I don't even think Trump is the right fit. Like, he's got his own orbit. And DeSantis would be a better example. Where could I see a scenario where he would appoint Gabbard to a meaningful position? I mean, and it could be anything from in charge of Veterans Affairs, right? Like, I mean, that's a logic. I mean, I could pick a dozen things. But clearly, she has kind of repicked her lot in the partisan world, and I am somewhat befuddled by it. Look, she's always kind of marched to her own drummer. I mean, that part is not new, and she has never been afraid to bloody the nose of somebody, irrespective of the letter next to their name. And you can ask Kamala Harris about that. Man, that was a takedown. I mean, so we're not surprised by any of that, but I am, to be candid, troubled by some of the people that she is now endorsing, campaigning. Like, she campaigned with Don Bolduc up here in New Hampshire. Don Bolduc was an election denier that even our Republican governor, Chris Sununu, called conspiracy theorist wackadoodle or something like that. Like, I don't care what your party affiliation is. That's just, you can't be hanging out in that. That's just not cool. Like, that's not a great place to be. That's not where the future of the country needs to go. So that stuff disappoints me, to be candid. And I did spend time with her during the primary process early on. And, she's very talented and she's very smart and she has some very valuable experiences in her life and all that. And I appreciate her independence in a theoretical sense. But where it has taken her, is frankly troubling at certain points. And I don't think that the Republic, like, she won't be a factor in terms of running for president. I suppose she could endorse somebody early.
Yeah, she could be a good surrogate and go on the attack for other people.
Yeah, and she's proven, and like, it's not a small thing, a willingness to do it. There's a lot of people in the political world who are just simply not good at it, or they're uncomfortable doing it. And she is both comfortable and good at it. She's good at it.
Yeah. Well,
but Steve, I don't see her as a factor in the way that I think the question might suggest.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. Well, we got to get you back, Steve. We barely scratched the surface. We have so much more to discuss. So let's have you back in the nerd zone. Maybe if we can try in the new year, kind of
Yeah,
early Jan or something.
absolutely. Reach out anytime. It's always a pleasure to see you. I love engaging with your viewers, and there's always going to be stuff to talk about. I'm telling you, after the holidays, it's going to be rock and roll time.
I love it. I love it. This is it's like the regular season starting. I love it.
Oh yeah.
And by the way, we didn't even get a chance to talk about the surprising performance of the Seahawks so far.
All right, 30 seconds. All right, ready? I think they are starting to come down to earth a little bit, but um, it is appearing that one of the great heists of the 21st century in American professional sport was the Russell Wilson trade. If an alien came down and said these two teams made a major trade where one quarterback was traded to the other for a slew of draft picks and talent, which quarterback this year was the one that created the bounty for the other team? It would clearly be Geno Smith. Geno Smith continues to be one of the most accurate quarterbacks of my lifetime.
Incredible.
And the team is competitive in a tough division. Although this year, obviously, divisions, Rams are rough, Cardinals, rough. But very impressed with Seattle this year. Really easy to like, really easy to root for.
Yeah.
And it has a real chance of making the playoffs.
And maybe in a small way gives Pete Carroll a little bit of grace for his Super Bowl 49 call.
Oh, well, I'm forever grateful to Pete Carroll. Where I'm from, if you've got beast mode in the backfield, what are we doing here? Run the ball,
God.
run the ball, run the ball.
That call was crazy, but you got to give him credit for making the Russell Wilson trade call, because a lot of experts said that was the dumbest call, trade ever.
Well,
and it happened.
And the big question, it's one of the most important questions of the NFL season, in what has been a pretty enjoyable season, despite the fact my Patriots, I'm afraid, are likely
sorry to hear
not
that.
in the playoffs. Well, that's a different podcast. That's an hour right there. Why is Russell Wilson decline? And the metrics, I think it's kind of like there were some signs the last few years that some metrics that were going in the wrong direction. But basically, if you are an undersized quarterback who relies on mobility to a high degree, if you lose a fraction of a step, and there's some evidence that he's lost a fraction of a step, a lot of things can go downhill really quickly as compared to, say, a guy like Brady. And Brady, not so much him, he's an anomaly, but folks like that, we'll call it the Dan Marino back in the day, that are more of a classic drop back, look around, throw the ball. Peyton Manning. You can decline a bit, and as long as your arm is okay, you can just keep firing it in. You're not dependent on the mobility.
Yeah.
Or the height. Now, like, if you don't have the height, you can't just sit in the pocket. You need to be able to get around the pocket and take advantage. And also the deep pass, that's been such an important part of his game. If that declines a little bit at all, I think he has a good team around him in Denver. They have a lot of talent. I'm amazed at how quickly that's gone downhill. And Seattle, between the talent you have, Geno Smith doing a nice job, these draft picks that you've sort of gotten back for some of the draft picks you lost in past trades, I think Seattle should be pretty excited about the future.
I think we are. I love it. Steve, have a great weekend. Thanks again for coming on, and we'll see you in the new year, and excited to continue the conversation.
Anytime. Looking forward to it.
Well, with that, we'll say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.
See ya. All right. Steve Marchand. I love that guy. I've never met him in person, I'm going to have to try and do that if I'm ever in New Hampshire, or Steve, if you're ever in Northern California, which is the most diverse state, but I didn't want to get into a California versus New Hampshire battle because it's an expensive media market and very large. So his points would have been well taken. If you enjoyed this live stream, you made it this far, or you're on replay and you're like, wow, I like this show, do me a solid, like, share, subscribe, please. Appreciate it. And some people who really appreciate this content, because it is a bit nerdy, it's a bit of a niche, people talking about politics in a kind of, I hope, thoughtful way. They can click that join button. And the join link means you can financially support the operating costs of this channel. And yes, we will give the shout outs to our members. And Elizabeth Norris noticed the aquariums again. Yes, thank you. I'm glad I didn't use a green screen, and hopefully folks are okay with me just having a in real life background. This is just my home office, and I've got the freshwater community aquarium there. And then you got fancy goldfish ranchus and a betta over here. And in the future, if you guys want, I'll show you the saltwater tank over there. But this is the one we got today. All right, so let's thank our channel members, because they make like the podcast hosting fees and some of the software licensing fees. They cover the cost for operating this channel. Like, I don't profit from it, but it does defray the costs. So our biggest supporter overall is Soldier One, a executive vice president, and you can just click on that join link in YouTube anytime you want, or right now. And it starts at $1.99 a month and helps keep the channel going. Our VPs are Kristen Slevin and Bike. So thank you, Kristen Slevin and Bike. And our hardcore, in order of total time as member, so Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Kirsch, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, shout out to Vaughn, Yang, Robert, Dean, Statner, Galessa, J. Perrin, AH, Dana, Jason, Parth, Daniel, and Mickey. And thanks to StreamYard for helping provide the streaming service if you're watching this live. And then at the verified level, which is only $1.99 a month, so super easy, cancel anytime. Lisa, Albert, Brandon, Arez, Sophia, Doris, Emerald, Ben, Rasta, James, Emma, Elizabeth, shout out to Elizabeth, Ira, Shoni, Dr. A, Jameson, William, Karen, Zemery, Mai, Brittany. Scroll. What happened? Warren, Wana, Lucky, Kevin, Nell, Toby, Jeremy. I think Jeremy was in the chat. David, Nicholas, Mike, Aurora, Zig, and Roberto. And who are our overall youngest and oldest members? So let's look at our oldest OG members. Lisa, Jean, Kristen, Albert, Brandon, Arez, David are about to hit the 3-year mark in terms of support for this channel. That deserves a gong. I mean, we're about to hit the 3-year mark. Where's the gong? Here it is. The nerd gong. 3 years of support for Nerds for Humanity. Oh, by the way, guys, the other reason why these channel members are awesome is some of the channel dues are going towards a original composition for the Nerds for Humanity intro music, which we will be announcing in the next week or two in a live show with the composer. So make sure you subscribe and join if you want to see more of that kind of thing. And then our youngest nerds, the little baby nerds, Roberto, Zig PC, Aurora, Mickey, Mike, all less than 3 months old. So welcome, young nerds. Welcome to the nerd universe. Let me know in the comments if you want any future topics or guests, or what you thought of the show and what you thought was most compelling. And I'm curious if people would bet with me that Trump will be the nominee, or are you in the more likely will be DeSantis? I think everybody knows. I don't know if we all know, but I think we all believe that Biden will be the nominee on the Democratic side, which, it is what it is. I think with Trump running again, I'd rather not have Trump than have him. So there you have it. All right. Good mind, nerds. Have a great weekend. Keep it real.